Well, hey, well, welcome everyone to the AE Spay Lecture Series, the consultant's role in architecture. I appreciate everyone coming in person. It's great to see faces and be able to interact before this presentation, and people online. Glad to see you, although I can't see you. My name is Brian Strazek. I'm an architect at Kennelly Architecture and Planning in San Francisco, and I was the AIA East Bay Board of Directors President in 2022. Since stepping off the board, I've been working on this lecture series. This is the third year we've done it. The first 2 years, we had over 50 people present like this. So an amazing crew of people, great conversations, very inspiring. And I'm glad these conversations are happening here at the AE Bay. In 2025, we're going to concentrate on the relationships of consultants and architects. Consultants play such a huge role in projects, and we're going to explore several different types of consultants and have really good, hopefully great conversations. That'll be up to you guys about these roles and what you guys do and how to make them more effective or more inspiring. So tonight we'll be discussing preserving the past, designing the future, working with preservation architects. All the participants are trained as architects tonight, but Peter and Mark at the other end, sitting in the consultant side. Peter works for Page and Turbo. He's a principal there, and Mark is an owner of Preservation Architecture. And then the people representing the architect voice is going to be Kent Rolls, principal at Wong Logan Architects, and Jim, the founder of Architectural Dimensions. I found out by doing a little research on you guys before having this presentation that we both were Kentucky graduates. So I think, are you not?
Sorry.
This is penciling that in. So 99. So it's close, right?
Very close.
All right. All right. Each presentation, we're going to do presentations all 5 minutes each. Kent and Mark are going to do a combo one, and then we're going to have a moderated discussion. But it's important to get your guys' voice in here too. So we're a small group here. Please feel free to catch our eyes and ask questions. It makes puts less pressure on us and makes it a little more fun. All right, so let's just get started. You got those for us? All right, wonderful. All right, so before starting the presentations, I wanted to start the fundamentals of what is historic preservation. Merriam-Webster defines it as activities or process of keeping something valued alive, intact, and free of damage and decay. So I don't know if you guys agree any bit of that. Just kind of give some thoughts on what historic preservation is before we start talking about scene projects.
Sounds like good to defer to our preservation consultant for that.
It's a lot of things. I mean, it's that. And I mean, my role in the consulting role ranges from, bona fide preservation where we're conserving buildings, sites, and materials to demolition, because I'm assisting with historic resource issues that are related to potential development or historic resource findings. So it's really a full gamut. It's a very engaging profession, because there's so much to do, and in between all that, a great deal of research and documentation. So you get to be.
I think why I most do it is because I get to be an author. I like writing, I like reading and researching, and so at least half of my work, and Peter will probably shares this, is writing, research and documentation.
We do a lot of writing and graphic documentation and research as well. But I would say that preservation is maintaining, and we're talking about buildings and sites here today, is maintaining existing historic resources so that they can continue to be understood for what they were. And I think what we also do at the same time is adapt them for for the future. And we're adapting them now, you know, for energy, sustainability, for fire, for accessibility, for all kinds of things. And so I don't know, there's the building that how buildings learn. And I think historic buildings, all buildings change over time and are adapting to what they used to be. But there are the preservation where ICOMOS historic sites where you want to strictly sort of, as much as you can, retain the past and not change it. But a lot of work we do is for institutional developers, homeowners, developers, where we're adapting it to sort of keep going. We want it to retain its integrity, but we're also at the same time laying on improvements and trying to make them less noticeable than, well, although we're not against contemporary additions that are contemporary, you know, that contrast with the historic as well.
I think you're gonna show some great examples. So are you ready to give a little presentation?
Sure, I'll show you
I think that'll be
my couple minutes.
forward and good stuff for it.
All right, Peter Burkholz, president and principal at Page and Turnbull. Page and Turnbull is a California base. We were founded about 50 years ago. We've had some tremendous alumni that have worked there, Mark Hulbert for one, that have gone on and done other things. Founded in 1973, and really the firm was about a reaction to all the Victorians that were being torn down for urban development in the Western Addition. Thank you. We expanded to Los Angeles 2006, Sacramento about the same time, and more recently to San Jose. And we really serve the West Coast is our sort of sweet spot. We've got 3 studios in that office. This office. I am in the architecture and design studio, and we are architects that can have the prime role or the consulting role. I can talk about and kind of wear both of those hats. We also have people that are preservation technologists. So you go out and you've got old Adobe that's crumbling, and it's like, why is it crumbling? And they can do the sort of scientific analysis and specify products that sort of will minimize the deterioration or limit the deterioration, as an example. And then we have a large group of historians. As Mark said, that there's a lot of written documentation that goes on in preservation. And in California, under the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, any property that's 50 years or older is considered a potential historic resource. And in certain jurisdictions, somebody in the audience was asking what's the difference about working in different areas, but San Francisco, for example, they have a very strict preservation policy. And indeed, if you have a building that's 49 years or maybe even 48 years old, the first thing they'll say is there a historic resource analysis done on the property? And what that does, that goes and does research and determines, did an event happen? Is it significant for its architecture? Or, you know, why is it significant? And our historians do that. They also do a lot of work with entitlements, the larger entitlements, where they're consulting with land use attorneys for sort of getting the planning approvals on things and looking at what's contributing, what's historic and what's not, and where can you do interventions or where do you not do it? We've been doing this for 50 years, and I think we're pretty good at it. So in different roles, here's a project we finished. I think it's been like 10 years now, which is darn crazy. Pier 15 and 17, the San Francisco, the Pier 15 and 17 are part of a larger National Register district. I think it's the Embarcadero, San Francisco Embarcadero Waterfront Historic District. Again, since it's the Exploratorium settled on this site, went into a long-term lease with the Port of San Francisco, and our historians did the sort of initial historic research into that building and sort of why it's historic. And that gets used for your later approvals. On the other side of it, I worked on this as the preservation architect. EHDD was the architect of the larger project. And we looked at the facades and how to restore the facades and how to improve the windows. And you see the painted cement plaster building here along the front that had cracks in it and sort of, we're trying to sort of preserve that primary historic fabric. But what you don't see is along the sides, there's like miles of precast concrete facades that had cracks in them, et cetera, et cetera. And we did that sort of preservation architecture. And then the third piece we did on this was historic tax credits. And we'll talk more. Somebody can ask a question, what are historic tax credits? But I'm running out of time here. So again, as a preservation consultant, we were the preservation architect to sorry, I didn't work on this one. I'm blanking on the firm name at the moment. To convert MBH, thank you. To convert this Bakar, or the old Pacific Art Center, into Bakar Bioingenuity Lab, which is kind of an astounding use for this, because if anybody's ever been in this building, it's a kind of a crazy interior layout, and like this is like the only use I think that could have ever happened to that. And on this project, we were the preservation architect, cleaning and the concrete, restoring the concrete back to its kind of original grandeur. There are large window assemblies with these rubber gaskets on that, and we advised on how to sort of treat those to bring them up to keep their life in them. And yeah, we're preservation architect on this one. On the other, with the other hat, I was the prime architect for a judicial council project. In the center here, you see a little one courthouse built in the 1890s. We did the rehabilitation. We led the project for this rehabilitation of that historic courthouse, and then a new 2-courtroom addition on that. And so in that role, we held all the contracts for the engineers, the civils, everybody, the programmer, et cetera. And one of the differences is if you're the consultant, you're sort of like narrowly focusing on your thing, and the prime architect's like, here's the schedule, where's your deliverable, giving you false deadlines so you get it in early so that you have time to do things. On this one, we had all the contracts, so any misses, it's our issue. It's like, oh, you didn't have that SWIP plan, or you didn't have that, the IT people we don't have that DES thing. It's like, what's a DES thing? And so then we have to go back to the client and say they don't have this. And it's much more complicated. The risks are higher, but the rewards are greater to have completed a larger project. And then on the smaller side, this was a pro bono project that I did a couple years ago for the Lake Merritt Breakfast Club. There's a little mid-century monster, it's called, in near Fairyland in the Lake Merritt in the park there. And so we did a performance type specification and oversaw a general contractor to do the restoration of this. And again, nothing goes unpunished. One of the lessons learned on this one is it's a cement plaster. And now when we do cement plaster, we like to put control joints in it because cement plaster expands and contracts. And so I had this great idea. There are going to be cracks in this. We don't want to restore the cracks. Let's coat it with elastomeric paint. It's like, great idea, huh? Kids jump on this thing, their shoelace catches on it. The elastomeric just peeled off. So we had to peel all that paint off. And anyway, and it was a pro bono thing. So it was like, we're eating things at feast we haven't even got. Yeah. It actually turned out well, and it's back in business for I don't know how long.
So what's the final solution?
Just a standard latex paint that's just much more durable. And one of the other things is they need to, like, it gets graffiti, they need to recoat it. They know how to do latex paint. It's like open the bucket and stir it. Oh, and then the final one close to home here is we were I think this is a Diller & Scafida or Snowhetta. Diller & Scafida project, and we were the preservation architect and I believe the historic architects. I'm getting the approvals on this one. I again didn't work on this, but some relevant projects we've worked on. And then finally, sorry, I thought prime architect on this one in Sacramento. This one, actually, this one and the Glen Courthouse, we just got 2 awards at the CPF conference for these two. This was 2 historic hotels built in the 1920s, unreinforced masonry, brick walls on the exterior, wood on the interior. And the lesson learned on this one is do all of your destructive testing early so that you don't find unforeseen conditions. And they couldn't do that because this was started right in COVID. And at the time that they got Mercy Housing got this property, they made it was like a very important affordable housing, keeping people off the streets so they couldn't displace them. And so the 18-month project turned into a 4-year project with resulting higher costs. That was a hard project.
Thank you, Peter. That's great. Any questions on that? Sure. Hold them and wait until the end. If anything, please go ahead. So the question, Chuck Davis, I think, worked on 2 of those projects, and he passed away last
I was at his
Wednesday.
Irish wake last
There
night.
you were.
Yeah.
And he was involved in 2 of our previous lecture series. Wonderful individual. And sad to see him gone. There's a founder of our. I guess it was the founder. He came in later.
Maybe we're up to 90. So,
Amazing individual.
Hi, how are you doing? I'm James Heilbrunner, architect and practicing a lot in Oakland, California. Started the firm in 1981, doing mostly retail work and chain work, if you will, that grew into hospitality. And along the way, bumped into remodel projects that led us to more significant historic projects throughout the Bay Area. We've worked on the Rotunda project back in the late 80s, early 90s to convert what was a vacant department store from the 60s that had partially remodeled and tried to bring back to the historic preservation standards that the developer failed on. It ran out of money and it was taken over by the city, transferred to a new owner. So we were mixing and matching different code requirements from when it was born to the current code we worked under. And this had tax credits and new market tax credits to fund it. It's about a 40,000 square foot area. Not efficient floor plan, a lot of common area, but probably close to 20% common area because of the rotunda and the aisleways, if you will. So structurally redone MEP, we were the prime architect and handled all the consultants and managed construction too. Fox Theater downtown Oakland, the long old story, was built in the early 20s. Went vacant in the late 60s, went through some turmoil, if you will, had internal fires. It was really decimated on the inside, had a lot of roof leaks. Family bought the project for $340,000 back in the late 80s. The redevelopment group took it over from the city and bought it and transferred that to a fee developer to get it done. The city still owns it today. Another Planet Entertainment, which is here in Berkeley, operates the building with a long-term lease. So we redid the building from scratch, inside and out. And of course, we added a feature that's pretty cool. They had surround, you can see in the one picture at the top, it was originally 2 office buildings flanking the theater. So we converted those office buildings to a school for the arts. And part of it, we had a demo out. We made way for, took a masonry building and converted to a wood frame building to lighten the loads and save money. So it's a combination of the school for the arts in the perimeter, theater in the middle. The school has rights to use the theater so many days a year for its purposes. And it's about 2,800 capacity. The first floor is, all the seats are gone. It's all platforms. So you can set up seats or have, in most cases, standing room only for listening to groups you've never heard of, or at least I've heard. So, yeah. So we're still in the middle of a project that's called Oak Knoll. It's along 580 in Oakland. It used to be the Navy hospital site, prior to which was a golf course born in the early 20s. This was the original golf clubhouse that's been saved, whereas all the other buildings from the Navy have been demolished over years. And there's a big master plan for housing, some retail, and salvaging this historic building that the historic preservation has put up a long fight against the developer
that wanted to tear it down and make way for individual home sites. So the big dispute was home sites, public use, existing neighbors didn't want it at all. The council didn't really care. The owners, the developer came to us for some ideas, and we said, let's move the building and make it the community center for the new project. It's 15,000 square foot U-shaped building. We took it apart in 5 pieces, wrapped it up like birthday presents, put it aside for a year. We had to build a road about a half-mile long to carry it to the new site. And today it's sitting back where in a new site on mat foundation. And of course, developers shy money. We just restarted with a new group to finish it. So pretty expensive per foot, if you will, but the city was up against the wall. The developer was up against the wall in a legal battle over either do it or we're going to kill the whole thing. So graffiti inside and out. The rendering at the bottom is makes it look. The picture at the bottom makes it look good, but there was raves inside. There was all fires built inside. It's a total disaster. A lot of asbestos, lead, and so it's back together. Our next challenge is to finish the inside and the MEP systems and the fire inside the building. We've worked on a bunch of projects that I'll say over the years haven't flown, if you will. I did work back in Louisville years after leaving on the Jefferson County Courthouse, where we remodeled the building while people were still in it. We had to move people around like a Rubik's Cube and restructure things and build new systems. It had an annex attic for archive books where archives books that had no live load capacity in the floor. So for the structural engineers, it's hard to believe these buildings can sustain such weight. Buildings that aren't historically registered, the Grand Avenue building was built probably in around 34. Office building, again, we manipulated the building to the tenants in the building while we rebuilt the structure. Had to move people around 2 or 3 times to do it. The building was basically a fire trap, had no proper stairs, exits, life safety systems at all. That's it.
Thank you, Jim.
Well, from the sublime to the gargantuan here. So this is the Long Logan Architects homepage of our website, and it gives you an idea of the breadth of our practice. But really, what I wanted to talk about is our 20-year collaboration with Mark Holbert. And it began in 2002, I think, when developer Eddie Orton called us up and asked us to be part of his team to compete for the redevelopment of the Ford building. And we in turn called Mark Holbert to bolster our bona fides, and he accepted. Do you want to tell him about the?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I had the pleasure of receiving that call and asked to team up on this project, which I'm a solo practitioner, but, and I was at this time. I had just gone out on my own, and Marcy Wong gave me a call and asked if I would participate, and I'm forever grateful. It's a remarkable building, of course, but it was like, you know, Jim's buildings, and we're just a wreck. It had really, you'll see, it had been kind of ruined. I mean, this is a 1929 Ford assembly plant for the Ford by Albert Kahn Associates. So, I mean, it really has distinction. It was used only partially for Ford manufacturing during the wars. It became a war facility, as you can see here. It started manufacturing. They started manufacturing tanks there. This is the Craneway. It has boat access and rail access. At that time, it had rail access. So it was a real, you know, this giant space, and some of you may know it today. It's on a pier. The rest of the building is inboard. The challenges are obvious. You know, the thing had been snockered in 1989. This is the Craneway's south side on the pier. It collapsed, and fortunately nobody in the building. The building was being used by UC Berkeley as storage facilities at that point in time. And thereafter it went into kind of massive rehabilitation. Here's some of the other conditions and several, an oil house, there's several parts to it. There's the craneway. There's the assembly building on the left and west, yeah, on the left up there, and the oil house, which is the old oil house that where they had the oil storage tanks that ran the whole facility. You know, it had conditional issues, but probably the most incredible issues were just scale. And it is a lesson in rehabilitation is that there were two developers ahead of us that had tried to do this project, and they took it on like a normal rehabilitation project, which is brick by brick. And, you know, when you've got a 1/4 mile long building and you've got, you know, hundreds of thousands of square feet of materials, you can't do that. You really have to really think at a larger scale, and they've burned through a whole lot of money leading up to our selection, Orton Development selection to redevelop this, so.
So where to start was always the question. Orton was a warehouse and manufacturing developer, and so we took the opportunity of adding a bunch of loading docks on the side away from the street on the east side there, and you could move in people relatively quickly and get a finished space and get some, not only generate revenue, but also sort of show what the place could be, and sort of so when they got the some of these marquee type tenants that would take the second floor office space, they saw, okay, it's a real project. There are people working here. It's not going to go bust in 2 years. So one of those tenants was SunPower, photovoltaic cell engineering firm and manufacturer. Lower right is, we did the TIs for this, and Marcy did this really cool suspended stair shown on the bottom. And we also, they took the opportunity, it's a sawtooth roof with north-facing skylights for lighting the factory floor, and the south-facing skylights all got photovoltaic cells. And
You know, this was also as you've heard from Peter, a preservation tax credit project, and that I would not have involvement in if it wasn't for that, to help administer those tax credits. And it's a rigorous process. The State Office of Historic Preservation and the National Park Service administer them. They're the reviewers, and they can be rigorous at times. They'd never approved a photovoltaic project before this. It's taboo to, I mean, at that moment, it was taboo to put solar panels on a historic building that would be visible. But of course, we had SunPower as a tenant, and we had this big industrial building, and we slugged away for months to convince the Park Service in particular, were not adept at the concept, to allow it. And then they championed it, of course. And they became, yeah, this is great. Let's do this thing. So, but there may be questions about the tax credit if people want to raise that up. There's a lot of discussion there.
the other sort of anchor tenant they got was Mountain Hardware, you know, outdoor clothing and gear manufacturer. And once they got those tenants in, we were able to focus on some of the other parts of the project, the Craneway, which is a massive building. It's a whole acre under one roof. And you can see this big 400-foot long parapet that had no structural support. So this is a picture on the lower right of working with Bill Chrysler to fake it all in GFRC and put it up there. Because again, the historic tax credit guys said, no, you can't put up a 2-foot, but 6-foot parapet. That's the interior of the Craneway. Boiler House restaurant, kind of working around the existing equipment. And the final piece was a visitor center, which was originally supposed to be a freestanding piece in the Craneway. And Marcy Wong had the great idea of putting it in this building. And they said, but it's only half the size, but they had a basement that was full of oil tanks. And once you took out the oil tanks and put the theater down there, That's shown on the before on the upper left and after on the upper right there. And another East Bay project is this general storehouse project that is Tehran and Mark are putting the finishing touches on with Jonah Hendrickson. Why don't you?
Yeah,
take
sure.
this one?
So this is another tax credit project, no coincidence. For developer Jonah Hendrickson, and he acquired this general storehouse on the Naval Air Base in Alameda Point. At the time he acquired this, there was almost nothing happening out there. There's this giant warehouse that had been a heavy storage warehouse for the Navy. And quite like the Ford building, 10-year project, Ford building. You'll see another one too. This one, 10-year project. We're just finishing it up. The what to do. I mean, that's kind of like one of the real issues is what to do with this big building. And you know, Jonah, bless his heart, had done some development, but not a whole lot. And it was all commercial kitchens. And so it's a challenging building, and I mean, I'm somewhat flabbergasted that we succeeded because it was such a challenge. I mean, this building was extremely raw, and you know, like just going through the motions of how to adaptively reuse this thing. It started as a very mixed-use concept, a commercial kitchen potential, whole design level drawings towards this, and then you know, eventually evolved into what it is today, open, largely occupied. It's a loft building with residential lofts over a range of commercial spaces and quite successful. But again, the conditions were difficult. It's perimeter windows and no penetrations otherwise. So very volumetric and no light inside the building. So we ended up with the Park Services, the SHPO and the Park Services, you know, agreement. I mean, they understood the challenges here to do a number of light courts in the building. So the green spaces there are these light courts that we cut in through these. It's a 3-story building and surrounded it with these lofts and you know, it really it's turned into a quite beautiful thing. I mean, the rooftop is heavily occupied. We tried to put an addition on there. We did not get this addition from the Park Service again, and that was okay. I don't think that was a particularly feasible direction in any event, but you know, this is some of the massing that happened. Here's these light courts, which were essential to making this building livable. And it is highly livable. It's quite remarkable that if any of you haven't been out to Alameda Point, go there. It's changed dramatically in the last 5 years, changing rapidly right now. A lot of development out there. So all of a sudden this building has, you know, neighbors and real uses that surround it. It's really quite good. Here's some of the live work units that were built out in here. So it's quite habitable. This is apartments. And it's drawn, you know, it's drawn some attention. There's a couple of good restaurants in it, and I mean, again, it's a bit of a miracle. It really is, and kudos to Jonah Hendrickson for his efforts.
You guys are at 10, so okay, no, but you have.
Can you just go to them?
Yeah.
quickly?
Okay.
Or-
So Pier 70, this is another large Orton development project in San Francisco. It's the red outline. It has these industrial buildings on the right, 2 city blocks, red tagged when we started, and some on the left side of 20th, on the north side of 20th Avenue, it has these office buildings. The big challenge here, besides the condition, was getting more, using that huge volume in some way. And to add some more leasable floor area to amortize a tremendous. Yeah, I think Marcy was responsible for this, is putting in these structural mezzanines, which you can justify to the reviewers very easily because it holds up the building, keeps the walls from collapsing. And it also gets you a lot more rentable area. The plan is shown on the lower right, the rentable area. So before and after with the mezzanines, all the new steel is painted black there. It's kind of hidden behind the existing steel, which is left raw there. It for tenants. How do you do that? Well, 60-foot tall glass walls that were very expensive.
Gorgeous.
Yeah, and this was a window replacement project, which we can get into. On the other side of the street, there's this power station, beautiful building. Again, almost no usable floor area. There are these 4 big compressors that take up most of the main floor, and their foundation takes up the floor below. So how are you gonna get any money leasing this? We were able to remove 3 of them, keep one of them as a feature, and then do an addition on the back, and of course, do another mezzanine in there that's structural. There's the mezzanine and the finished main space, just a beautiful space. And we're currently working on Maclac Churro Hill project of 5 buildings, former paint factory, creatively building named A through E. We finished building D. This is Peter Logan's view or kind of concept for, what this building was going to look like. And this is what it really looked like when we started. And amazing. And the idea was, again, put some mezzanines in it, make the structural work for multi-purpose, and then put a big skylight in to light the middle. And there's the finished project that looks remarkably like the rendering, doesn't it?
Voila.
Before and after shots. And we're talking about new buildings that were markedly new next to a historic building. Where we probably needed you when we went through the San Francisco Planning Department. They didn't share that view entirely. This is Peter Logan's rendering and for a new building, infill building in that complex. And to wrap up, the other design challenge with this is sort of making a coherent whole out of these 5 individual buildings. And the solution was to make this sort of atrium shared lobby that connects 3 of them at 4 different floor levels. And then you get to the top of this greenhouse and look back at the city, or you go to the roof and voila. Thanks.
Thanks, Kent, Mark, appreciate it. Thank you all. Any questions yet? All right. Well, it was wonderful. I think it was oh, I just put my head down. Go ahead. Oh,
I am wondering what the project delivery is for all of your projects, whether it's all fully designed, then bid, then built, or are there any other project deliveries being considered? And I know that that's probably influenced a lot by the developers, by the owners, or the institutions.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Like Orton has a lot of their own forces doing more and more of the work as they got better at it. And as they saw what they had to pay to have other people do it, and they had in-house, they had hazmat and things like that that were, really the way to keep the costs down. The issue, a lot of these is some of them have no documentation about what's in the walls or what's in the footings, especially. And so trying to do a conventional build is very challenging.
That's why I asked about whether they would find anything different. It's like.
Yeah, I mean, we have the Maclac project, they try to, guaranteed maximum price. But, in theory, and they did it very, very early in the project to get on with it, and then every time they dig a hole, well, the structural says, well, there's no foundation. We need to add a foundation, and the GMP keeps going up and up and up. So much for the G.
Yeah, I think that what you're getting at, Walterio, is the we've been to the conference and drank the Kool-Aid of design build is the future, and more large institutions are going design build. And the office has a project we're doing in Tiburon, the old city hall there, that we're in the early design stages, and the CMR on that, which I won't name, it's a big firm starts with a K. They have been really urging the client to go in a design build scenario. And internally, the other principals are becoming, what should we do? What should we do? Peter, you've gone to the conference, you know about design build. And it's like, the thing is just on these historic projects, you develop such a knowledge of the buildings, and they're in your documents. And, you know, design build, there's different, you can do different levels of development of the bridging documents, however they are. And so I was saying I think on these design build, because we've gone out and surveyed the cracks, and we have the laser scan, and we've done the specs, and we sort of have all this knowledge. It's really hard to transfer that. And there's very little value in transferring that to the design build contractor that has to come and do it after. So my recommendation to them is, like, if you really want to do design build on this, let us do a very comprehensive set of criteria documents that really defines the historic component and get the historic approvals, so that the new design build entities doing the new stuff, and that the other stuff's figured out. So you don't pay for it twice, because you'd have to pay for it twice. So yeah, and that is and different projects that I showed, most of the projects are design, bid, build. That's been the way. But like the Judicial Council at some point a decade ago was like, CMR is the way to go. And so we're going to bring the contractor in early and pay them to do constructability reviews through the early design stages and get that price certainty. And then they're like, no, that doesn't work. And then and what happens always is the contractor, that same firm with a K, I don't know why they're always there. They had like the pre-con team, and then they came in, and the construction team, when they came in, it's like, no, you should do it completely different. And it's I don't know. So
But if you come up with a good idea, let us know.
yeah.
It's good to have the developers do it, actually. The storehouse in Alameda was also largely initiated by in-house contracting, and you know, and effectively for, you know, not for all the scopes, but for, you know, a lot of them. So
Well, I think a common thread on a lot of these projects, Jim, I know some of your clients that you've had on your projects, and I've got projects that I didn't show here where we have that developer client, and that developer client at times gets kind of stressed out, right? When these unforeseen things happen, and they've got a lot of risk on stuff, and there's a lot of pressure to do stuff. And Mark, we've got pressure to get the SHPO to approve this thing. It's like, we can only suggest, we can't approve, but we're doing what we can. But yeah, what you don't see is a lot of, on these developer projects, a lot of stress along the way.
Developers will do miraculous, crazy things to get their price down. So they'll build it with their kids, they'll build it with their family, they'll build it with their in-house people, they'll build it with contractors from Texas, Oklahoma, ship them in, let them stay in a hotel, all kinds of mechanisms that never replaces the fact that if it's not on the drawings in a contract, you're not getting it. Nothing's changed for 100 years about that. So if the wall sections aren't there and the materials aren't on the drawings, it's extra cost. So the earlier discovery you can do, including testing, and also aligning whatever variances you need, like AMMRs, early to identify what you can't do, trying to use the historic building code in your report. The more you can do up front, the more information there is. But there's always going to be a contingency factor on historic renovation, and it's not 5%.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the state historic building code, because if anyone's doing this kind of work, that is your friend. And there's one section in there, I think it's 910 or something like that, but it says you can change the occupancy without bringing the thing up completely to current codes. Now, however, subject to the authority having jurisdiction, right?
The basic premise of the historic building code is that it gives you some wiggle room, but you have to alternatively prove your point. So you can keep a plaster ceiling that's suspended, but does it work? Does it structurally work? Is it still sound? So what kind of testing do you have to do in the Fox Theater? We microscopically tested the burlap bags that are inside the plaster components, suspended from steel wire. So we tested the bags microscopically to see if they were rotting inside the plaster before we said we're going to keep it. So that kind of early testing to get you through the variances you may need in the code is critical. And that's, of course, a big spend up front. There's a lot of money spent up front to do this discovery. Otherwise, you're subject to open-ended extra costs.
But we're the architects, and so you did that testing, and then you needed some structural engineer to say, yes, this provides some level
Absolutely.
of strength, and there's.
We had big debates about for example, the stage roof, which did it have the capacity to hold the existing structure itself? You had video screens, which are very heavy, plus mechanical equipment we wanted to put on the roof. And the engineers started off and said, no way, we had to rip off the whole roof structure and start over. We tested the steel, and basically the steel's stronger than what you could buy today. So we didn't change the structure at all. But again, testing. You gotta prove your stuff.
Well, it's testing and analysis, so there's extra cost that
Oh,
goes
yeah.
in the engineering in the early phases.
Absolutely. It's not. Absolutely. More money up front. So that you can have a GMP that keeps going up.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. So what's a successful project then? I mean, it's interesting. So it doesn't sound like
Well,
dollars may not be the most successful because it's really hard to gauge. You talk about the mid-century monster, like that thing is now engaged the community, but you had these kind of testing to get it. And Mark, you'd mentioned the idea of like, okay, sometimes it's just makes sense to demo the building. And so is a nice plaque for those type of projects, or a nice book about the project, is that successful? Like,
Sometimes, yeah.
sometimes it is.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't say that facetiously at all. I mean, there's a lot of judgment that has to go into what constitutes an historic resource, and you know, we're all in this together right now with, you know, the development of housing. I mean, I'm super proud to be involved in housing development not directly as an architect, but helping sort out site uses and what's valid, what's worth keeping, you know, trying to get through those loops, which are not easy, I mean, jurisdictionally, but you know, it's a very serious game at the moment because of the issues we're facing. And, you know, I'm an advocate, you know, long-time preservation architect, but, you know, being realistic right now is really important. And, you know, so sometimes I was driving by a site last night with my wife and new buildings going up, and I said, my project, because I helped tear that building down to make that go up. And you know, and it feels like a success, right?
There's different successes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are
There's an
different
architect's success, and then there's financial success or not. A lot of projects don't pencil in the beginning, and there's big commitments made on the hope of new financing, and sometimes that goes south. Doesn't mean the project doesn't get done or there's not a party at the end, but did it work monetarily? Most developers aren't doing it out of the goodness of their heart.
Yeah. No.
And segue into two questions. I mean, relative to the stuff we were looking at tonight, I mean, the risk that these large developments go through, I mean, the huge risk and huge outlays of capital, getting to a point where you're hoping to break ground, hoping to turn a corner, right? And so there's a lot of, you know, freaking out that goes on early in this process, right? So what's a success in that regard? The letter from the National Park Service that authorizes your project, right? At the last minute, right? That's what happens. We just got one this week on a project. It's like a big project, working on it for 10 years. We'd had conditional approvals, but you know, they're tentative, you know, and you know, you're building your way towards a successful ending. But on a tax credit project, it's that final day when that letter arrives from the National Park Service that says you meet the standards and your tax credit will be released, right? So that's real success. Those days you're like, yeah. man,
Sounds
we're
like we
up-
need to talk about tax credits for
tax
people like
credits.
myself who don't really understand it. So yeah, it's come up lots of times. What are they?
It's been a very successful program for historic preservation where basically uh, an owner in coordination with a big entity that can afford to to get tax credits, basically sells their tax credit availability to a partner like a bank, B of A, Wells Fargo, and they become part owners of the building for a duration, and the owner then can buy it back at a later date. So you're be like selling your tax credits on your federal return if you have tax credits for your children. So I'll sell them to you today for your taxes, and I'll get cash for that. So that's a very simplistic.
I had this very call today. A developer purchased a historic Nob Hill apartment building. And they were talking to their land use attorney, and their land use attorney said, you should talk to Page and Turnbull about tax credits. And he's like, can you talk about tax credits? Let's talk about tax credits. So there's federal. And the great thing, and I don't know how about the technical, who owns the money and all that stuff. But I think the key thing is that if you can use the federal rehabilitation tax credits that, as Mark said, has onerous kind of restrictions and reviews along it, you can get 20% of your hard and soft costs for the project eventually at the end. And believe me, the developers, when they're like in times like now, and that they're trying to make a project go, 20% matters a lot in their pro forma. And they don't need to have the money now, but at some point when they kind of are closing everything up, they want that 20%. And exploratorium, like, what was that, $130 million times 20%? That's a big number, right? And there are ways that we're working like on it, and the caveats on it is that if you buy this building for $50, $50 million, say, and you want to do a tax credit project, you have to spend $50,000,001 on your rehabilitation project. So this person that bought this apartment building that's operational in San Francisco, he's like, we're probably not going to do a project. They're buying it now, right?
Yeah.
If you bought it 50 years ago and your value is like 300,000, even though it's a $50 million value to the building, your tax basis is that small enough. So you could do that. And so like if you're doing like a port project that's condemned, you're the developer that comes in and you get that project, they get them for like not very much, like $1 perhaps, and they get it for a 66-year lease, which makes them the owner, which allows them to do the federal tax credits. The state recently did a program, and that was a kind of an amazing thing. It's been on the books for like 5 years, and January 6th of this year, they opened it up to people to submit for it. That hotel that I showed you up there submitted at 30 seconds before 8 a.m., at 8 a.m. on the dot, and at 30 seconds after 8 a.m. And the 30 seconds after 8 a.m. got accepted. But there were 5 other ones in those 30 seconds that got accepted. And I think one of them was your Alameda project. There was 2 projects that got all the money on these on the state tax credit. So
We were first in line.
it didn't, well, you hit the button at the exact right time.
We really
Somehow.
worked hard on that.
Uh,
They run here and there.
Yeah, nice work. So, and then the other incentive, these are called tax incentives. The other incentive is a good one is the Mills Act incentive. And that's basically, you say you've got this wonderful building here in this facade. I'm going to do a 10-year program on my building. Year 1, I'm going to redo the roof. Year 2, I'm going to do the foundation, probably. Well, to start with the foundation first, right? So it doesn't fall down. But anyway, they'll lock in your tax basis. They won't take those improvements into your tax basis. And it's a state program that's implemented by certain city jurisdictions. San Francisco has it, Oakland has it, and others. And those are the 3 primary incentives.
I don't know if it came out exactly, but the federal and state credits are income tax credits. So
Correct.
the income tax credit means, they're backing these dollars directly out of their tax burdens. In the cases of Exploratorium or Pier 70 or, these big projects, most individuals, even well-heeled individuals, don't have that kind of tax burden. So they share the burden with via LLCs and even can market them, right? So.
Yeah, and the caveat on that is you need to be a for-profit entity to use it. You have to pay taxes, right?
You have to-
Although there are programs
Yeah.
that they can, nonprofits and governmental schools and that sort of thing can sell their
They can.
credits, right?
Or they can form some sort of entity that somehow allows them to use that. Again, consult with.
They're the famous tax credits.
So we should throw a question out.
Oh, yeah, please.
50-year-old building, it becomes historic under the eyes of Sequoia. Where things aren't getting younger, we have decades of buildings that are aging. What's the future for discretionary approvals by cities on quote-unquote historic buildings that are over 50 years old? We're gonna see more cumbersome permitting process and entitlement process because of that? I'm throwing it out.
Well, I think you have to understand that, not all buildings are gonna be, they're not all great, right?
I'm
So
not,
if somebody decides that Mark gets paid to come and do a report and Mark says, there's not a master architect. It's not a great example of that type of building, then it's, even though it's, just because it's 50 or 75 doesn't mean it's historic. It has to have a reason for being historic.
right, but correct.
But it does-
In the eyes of the jurisdictions that oversee entitlements and permitting, we just had one where the city questioned the project because it's a two-story walk-up hotel built in 65. It's over 50 years old. We need to study that, and we need to get back to you about that. So it's
Jurisdictions
not
do it.
any architectural marvel by any means.
Yeah.
We're replacing windows and doors.
Right.
In kind. And we got hit with, we need to study that, and we need to pay a fee for them to study that.
Yeah, well, it goes by jurisdiction also. I mean, we
Right.
can look to Marin County as an example that, while some of the cities in Marin County exercise their CEQA obligations, the county very largely does not on the historic resource front, right? Natural resources take priority. So, I mean, it depends upon the jurisdiction. I do a great deal of work in the inner Bay Area, right? Oakland is one where you're not gonna submit an application for a 50-year-old building without assisting with the identification of whether it's a historic resource. Berkeley, absolutely. San Francisco, absolutely the same thing. So there's a paid for hoop jumping exercise that has to go into these upfront projects, right? To identify, because the jurisdictions have an obligation, whether they follow through with it or not, they have an obligation to define historic resources under CEQA and then to define whether there's an effect on historic resource. It's a two-pronged thing. So, it's really jurisdictional. It's really very much so.
Could I ask a question?
I thought it was appropriate because you were just talking about jurisdictions. I don't know how much you guys follow, San Francisco politics. Probably do in terms of planning and whatnot. But Mayor Lurie is in. I heard Hillis is out. Interesting. I don't know what happened there. You probably know maybe better than I do. But with Hillis out, how do you think that may change the landscape in terms of planning, historic preservation, and how they approach these things?
It's a long time question.
That's a big question. I don't know I personally, I do not have an answer for that. I mean, San Francisco politics, planning politics, it's always been a bit of a mystery to me, despite having spent decades, standing at that counter and working with preservation planners.
Yeah, I think the planning director, Rich Hillis, is the head of the department. So he has some ability to sort of direct planning staff, but I would note that San Francisco Planning Department has more preservation planners than New York City does. So I think there's some sort of embodied weight there that sort of deflects it. And I think San Francisco it's like, why do we like San Francisco? It's like, it's got interesting streets, interesting buildings, the Victorians, there's a character to it. I think San Francisco values historic buildings, and there is a tension there now. And I don't know. I saw that he left, and I didn't think that it was like a regime change or anything, but perhaps it could be.
It probably will be. I mean, he has his own, perspective and well entrenched there, right? I mean, I don't know how many years, 20 years since he's been there.
10.
So, I mean, it's gonna necessarily change. Now, what that means, I don't know. As Peter points out, the preservation staff there is dense, it's a dense department and
But even though we are, Jim, you're right, we, as the preservation historic people, we get paid to sort of do these reports and make part of like a third of my office's income perhaps is sort of doing that kind of work. We-
I'm not saying it shouldn't be done. I'm saying
No.
as an awareness to as an architect, what's involved in the process to get there. It's more than just fixing the building, if you will. A lot of politics, a lot of regulatory things that are not obvious.
Yeah, and we get frustrated by the time periods,
Right.
the time that happens and things like that, and and it's like and the number of public hearings and et cetera.
I mean, so we're seeing a change. We're in the midst of a change there though, because of the state housing bills, right? So all of a sudden, and if a resource has not been under the various state housing bills, if a resource has not been previously identified or as even eligibly historic, the door is shut once the SB application is in. And that is a game changer. That is a game changer in all state jurisdictions, actually. There's caveats and, it doesn't change historic status if there is one already, but, I'm working on many where there's, confirming that there was no historic status before, so they can move forward without these obligations in order to streamline. And, I'm sympathetic there also,
Right.
in order to streamline. So the state gets some real credit for this. I mean, the state gets some real credit for, and then, preservation groups don't love it. That is for darn sure.
They certainly don't.
But the writing's on the wall and it's being effective. I mean, right in Berkeley, there's a whole crop of projects that are working that channel and really helping to move projects into a delivery that are extraordinarily slow otherwise, extraordinarily. So, it's a game changer again, but we'll see where that stays. And of course, the finances right now are so challenging that even the state bill's not really helping to pump these developments forward, but that's hopefully momentary.
I think it's interesting because you're talking about 50 years and a whole bunch of new styles are coming into that, right? We had brutalism, you showed the old Pacific Art, the Art Museum, and now it's being preserved. Postmodernism is now probably really close to it, and that's has been questionable from an architectural standpoint. Yeah, how do you guys approach that, or what do you guys think of that?
I'm waiting for the shipping containers.
Right, yeah. I mean, how about tract houses in, in Modesto? I mean, big neighborhoods. I mean,
Yeah.
How about the original Taco Bell
there you go.
forever?
Yeah.
If it's original, that's
I saw that.
Oh, they did.
Get a
Was a
good
taco,
ex-
was a Taco Bell. I think it was. Pacifica, right? On the, close to the beach. We did that project.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah, but you're right, there are these new styles that are sort of being looked at, and I didn't go to it, but there's an organization called Doko Momo that was originally about preserving modernist buildings, but at their recent conference in Boston, I heard that they're starting to look at postmodernism and deconstructivism and sort of all these other types. And actually, our office got paid by the city to write a context statement on postmodern context. And what that is, and I haven't read it, but I heard it's really great. I think you can find it online. And an example is now a new preservation battle that's happening is Valancourt Fountain along the Embarcadero, that kind of
right.
concrete thing at the Embarcadero. The city wants to remove that and do it a new park and kind of get rid of it. And
Yeah.
I think it's the skateboarders and other people are coming out that want to
Yeah.
preserve it. And so there's this constant dynamic and you know, I don't know, it's kind of interesting. I don't know where it's going to end up. But a interesting thing, a 50-year-old building though, one of my favorite buildings that I've had the opportunity to work on, and it's not really a style, but in Sacramento, the Bateson Building, when Jerry Brown was first governor, he hired Sim Vanderin to be the state architect, and Barry Wasserman was the second one up. And, you know, Jerry, like outside the box thinking, he wanted a new building that represented the state. And at the time it was, and they actually implemented some really great things. Streetcars, a walkable city that now makes Sacramento a much better place than I think it would have been had they just created this city with office buildings and parking. But the Bateson Building is a wonderful building that they commissioned. It had all of these sustainable features. It had operable sunscreens on it.
Yeah.
It had an atrium. It had a really cool feature called, the other person that was involved in this was Peter Calthorpe,
Right.
Congress for a New Urbanism guy. And he came up, we were on the design criteria team for a project with DGS on that one. And so looked at all this stuff. And he came up with this term cooleth. In Sacramento, the nights are cool and the days are hot. And so what they did in the basement of it is they had thermal rock storage. They would cycle through the cold air at night, and in the day they would reverse it. This building came online like 1980. They rushed the occupancy and they were excited to get in there. People all of a sudden were getting sick. It didn't have low VOC carpeting. It didn't have low VOC paint. So they were like having things. And the worst thing was, you've heard of Legionnaire's disease. That was at the exact moment that Legionnaire's disease,
Wow.
and they freaked out about the possibility of getting Legionnaire's disease from the rock storage. And they shut that off, and it never lived up to the thing. But now I was up there last weekend and they rehabilitated a really cool building, the Bateson
Wow.
Building.
That's interesting.
Look it up. But
Yeah.
much to Jerry Brown's chagrin, his building is now a historic building, because he was never like wanting, like, what's that? California doesn't even have buildings, 100 years old. How can that be historic? But anyway, I segued, but I look that building up. It's super cool.
Well, I'm really curious about the postmodern thing because the beginning of preservation in the Bay Area, in San Francisco, Charles Page, bless his heart, was the City of Paris building tear down. That was what the crux of it was a moment of shift. And it was replaced with Neiman Marcus. Neiman Marcus, right? And that is Philip Johnson. And it is the postmodern building in San Francisco. So for that to go from the nemesis, I mean, the nemesis when it happened, to being considered a potential historic resource, knowing, funny enough, having worked on the addition to that building, that the owners of that building wanted to sandblast the whole thing to get rid of the multicolor thing, because they were concerned about this, right? That someday this is going to come up, and that's what you can do with buildings, is alter them to the point where they won't have potential, but they didn't do that. So now they're in the crosshairs. I suspect, I don't know what Page and Turnbull's come up with.
I haven't heard about it. I heard that building's going up for sale though.
Yeah, wow. Well, another one.
We'll see,
Jeez.
but I think there's not a lot of development going on. I think it's safe for the time being.
Yeah. Curious. Postmodern.
I think I think the diversity of conversation and projects you guys show is great. And, from Jim, you kind of had a couple of examples where it was just really like the Fox, really kind of hardcore preservation. And then Fox Knoll or whatever, like where you actually moved the thing around. And like, what do you guys think of those approaches? And then, you guys have been working on these kind of modern interventions into buildings for a very long period of time, very successfully. So a lot of interesting approaches. Does the building tell you that? Is it a fundamental thing of your firms? Like what leads you to these decisions and different methods of approaching projects?
well, there are opportunities, you just look at the project and what makes sense and what can you do, in concert with that the developer likes because it makes some money and that you like architecturally because it's really cool. And
Yeah, but I think we're all trained as designers. And we go through, we look at the alternatives and we kind of vet those out. We show them to our client. Our client's like, no, that sucks, or we do this. And we've all learned the thing is like, don't show them the alternative you don't want, right?
It always
Like,
comes
you don't
back to
have
that.
that. But on the other hand, I think as architects that deal with preservation and getting approvals, I think you have to have an extensive list of things you've looked at so you can say, this is the best solution. So people can say, did you look at that one or did you not? And you mentioned like lifting buildings. I think a thing that we're now seeing, it used to be, it's like, you can't move a historic, but if you move an existing historic building out of its site, it's lost its context and it's no longer historic. But we're now looking at sea level rise and fire. And I think we're beginning to be a little bit more flexible on these things and say, and I think maybe the tax credit project might allow a lifting of a pier building like the ferry building or something
Right,
at some point, because they are sort of, endangered. And what would you rather have, a slightly changed building or a completely lost building? And so we're it's unimaginable, the sort of future.
Yeah, it's a challenge, I think, for the preservation community, and which I'm a member, but, there's, advocacy groups that are very strongly involved in planning departments who are very active in protection of resources, and, that's a changing circumstance now. I mean, I could cite again Berkeley, but San Francisco has several, and San Jose has several. Oakland definitely has several of these buildings where we're either relocating or taking down substantial parts of the buildings, right? And say, okay, I mean, I'm very directly involved in that. Long Logan, we're involved on the California Theater here right here in Berkeley, and we've gotten through a very challenging review process to remove the building, actually, keep the facade, and we're doing that several times, and not just, easy to say that, but under CEQA, not easy to say that. It's really a matter of cooperation with advocacy groups and with the city, who have to, of course, accept this solution as a means of rescuing what's valuable. And that's kind of I'm very active in this subject right now. And I just, again, see a changing world, where we have so many pressures on, and preservation is not the highest priority. It is not the highest priority. So good to see Oakland deals with it straight up, because Oakland's realities are so different than the other jurisdictions' realities. I mean, and they know that. They know what the crosshair world that they exist in, and planning and preservation have always been very, very active there. I mean, their preservation staff is stalwart, has been stalwart for decades, and really, but still they get the lay of the land, and certainly in Oakland they get the lay of the land. So finding alternative solutions, it's easier in Oakland.
It's funny that you say straight up about Oakland. Our historians in our office sort of say Oakland makes it up. San Francisco is like, it's like the lawyers are there, they're in that planning commission or the historic preservation commission meeting. In Oakland, there's that one person that's been there for a long time that sort of is like, this is how we do it. And it's like, well, that's not really how it's interesting. So different jurisdictions have different processes, and you have to understand how they work.
That's true. Very true.
I'm not saying names.
It's very true. No names. Bless her heart.
Jesus.
Any questions from the audience? So, okay.
We can just keep jabbering all.
I know, it's
night,
been
so
pretty good. I think we have a little
We
bit
got
more.
another one here.
All right.
So how about institutions who are their own authority having jurisdiction? UC. How are they different from City of Oakland, City of San Francisco? And, what's your experience dealing with them?
We were talking about that just before this whole meeting, that Mark's on the Marin Civic Center Conservancy. And basically, I said, what's that? I said, well, we're the people that get to see what they're gonna do and approve it before they do it. I said, oh, said, yeah, up until they created us, the county staff could do whatever they did whatever they wanted because, they're self-permitting.
Oversight.
That was sort of.
Yeah,
aside.
I mean, a little different than UC, but yeah, I mean, they're sovereign in that sense. I mean, UC is sovereign and they. People's Park. I mean, look at what happens in Berkeley with UC Berkeley. I mean, they have the ability to circumvent the CEQA. They don't have to abide by CEQA the way that all of the local projects do. And there's still courtesy review. Obviously, we see that with all of our UC projects, but they can steamroll. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, again, I think from my already jump over the even these projects where we're doing facade retention in Berkeley, we're way trying to avoid environmental impact reports because they become so prohibitive on the cost side and time side, right? So we really are finding strategies to go around that. Even a fairly, complicated projects, expensive projects, you think would support that more, but the UC entity, other state entities don't have that obligation.
Mark, when you say remove, do you mean demolish or do you mean take the building and move it to a contextual site where it kind of its historic nature is kind of in a different context and maybe it's
Both, I mean, but not remove entirely. I mean, if we're dealing with an historic resource, we don't want to remove entirely. Again, because of CEQA, because if we do that, we're throwing ourselves into an environmental impact report, and the outcome, we don't know the answer until the outcome.
But UC Berkeley is removing them as in.
Oh, yeah, they have the potential to.
Let's just say they're being euthanized.
Without-
We don't know the final disposition.
Without mitigation, and moving it it's like a mitigation, hopefully you're not gone so far down an environmental review path that you're looking for mitigations, you're looking for negative declarations or that you've met standards in some way, right? So.
Yeah, and that was a question in our prep. We came up with why would somebody want their building to be historic? And I think the reason is there's some sort of community attachment to the building. There's some sort of, it's like, it could be the ferry building in San Francisco. It's the symbol of the city. So yes, but I think another reason that buildings become historic, like that Glenn County Courthouse that I showed. It actually, and state agencies will do this, and developers will do this too. They want to get they want to get the benefits of historic significance, but they don't want the eventual burdens of it being on the National Register or something like that too. So that one, we never did put it on a national listing. It didn't go for the tax credits because it's a state entity, so they couldn't use that. But what they did use it for is by preserving the building, and a term we haven't talked about, the Secretary of Interior standards, which if you treat a historic property, and there's 10 standards that you review that you go through, but basically it's sort of, you maintain the historic integrity of the property in the big picture. And if you are compliant with, and different jurisdictions, some are like, you've got to be compliant with all 10 standards. Some is like, no, 8 out of 10 is good enough. That's okay. That works for us. But if you're standards compliant, then your CEQA path is different. So instead of the full EIR, or the next step down is the mitigated negative deck, and then there's the negative declaration, and a so environmental impact report says traffic, all the pieces. And historic is cultural resources are a piece of the historic CEQA analysis as a chapter. And we get lumped in with archaeology too, but there's typically not a lot of archaeology here. But if you can do a standards compliant project and have it CEQA compliant, you don't need to do that EIR. You might be affecting it in some way that you need to do a mitigation. So the preservation, so demolition equals, or facade preservation equals removing most of the building equals demolition in CEQA terms. But the facade preservation in itself might be a mitigation that might make the bigger project more easily approvable. And more easily approvable means instead of 18 months for your EIR, you can do it in 6 months, and that means money on the developer side. So, and in the case of the Glenn County Courthouse, I think we got categorical exemption in that the same reuse of the building, whatever. So they didn't have to go that full EIR process. So it saved us as taxpayers money, and it saved project costs, et cetera, along.
But the county went through
it was a state project, so it was exempt from county or local jurisdiction.
We can go for one last question here. And Peter, you'd proposed this one as a conversation. We're all very creative individuals as architects. We were really good at problem solving. But there's still a lot of buildings out there that are very interesting, and just wondering what ones that you guys fantasize about for a future project, and anything we can do to, as a group of architects or organization, to stimulate it happening.
Well, personally, since I make my money getting paid to design buildings, it's the next project that I'm looking at. I'm sure you're the same way. It's like, here's this great opportunity. You're already like thinking, oh, we could do this. We could do this. Like Walter, we were looking at that courthouse and it didn't have the in custody. It's like, we could do a low carbon courthouse because it doesn't have the I3. It could be a lower occupancy level. And like, we're thinking about it. And then we get the projects like, you can't do that because you don't have this and that. Anyway, to me, it's always sort of the potential next project. And I guess there are ones that I dream about, but what I would dream about, and it's a postmodern fantasy, is I don't know if any of you have been down San Pablo Avenue, where you go out of Richmond and you're going north out of Richmond, and Ace Architects got paid in the 1980s to do streetscape improvements. And Ace Architects was like the Oakland firm that did like postmodernism, like Leviathan and stuff like that. And they did like somebody's house in the shape of a saxophone or something. There are this amazing postmodern streetscape. I think it's in the town of San Pablo in there. So it's a really kind of thing that's like, it's just there right now, in the midst of this like San Pablo Avenue. So that's my fantasy.
Good one. Modest.
Well, if
I
you're,
don't have one, I don't have a particular one. There's a lot of.
you can think about it.
I'll think
Come
about
back
it.
to you.
Come back to me.
Yeah, if you're driving toward the Richmond Bridge, just before you get on it, you take a right at Point Malati, which is a pretty interesting place. There's this brick castle called Winehaven. We actually were selected to, do a rehab
We were on the team that didn't get selected. I dreamed about that one. We were on the other team that didn't get selected.
You guys both lost, right?
Yeah.
Everybody lost.
Everybody lost on that one, but, and then even kind of neater, right beyond it is like this whole community of little cottages with just on the shore of San Pablo Bay. That could be a real sweet spot right there.
Well, it should be. I mean, we can't point fingers, but that is a tragedy, that site. If you haven't gone out there, I mean, it's incredible, really. I mean, there's incentive to go out there too, because you take the Point Melati exit and last exit going west, and you can go to this marina out there called the
Yeah.
Sailing Goat. The Sailing Goat, it was taken over a couple of years by some new operators, and it is a destination. It is a very curious location, but totally good restaurant, bar out there on the water, and it's worth finding if you haven't been there.
And you can do post-industrial apocalyptic camping on the seaside. My daughter was in high school in COVID and wanted to have like a senior trip, and there were all the fires there, and they wound up there, and it was like camping on like rubble next to the water. It was them and like some European people with a rented camper or something. Just fun.
That's a good one. There it is. I'm on the Winehaven table too. It's just such a unique place, and it's ripe. It's ripe.
Yeah, going.
I'd like to see the Oakland train station get done. We looked at that. It's probably been 10 years now, and it's got some structural issues. Small building, so it's a difficult one to what's marketable for that, but with the platforms and very expensive redo. And there's site around it for housing that's being contemplated. That doesn't look very good with respect to, doesn't respect the train station, if you will. I mean, the city screwed up not making the train station renovation a priority in the first phase of development. And they got caught on that.
Redevelopment's gone.
Redevelopment's gone. I mean, it's a $75–80 million redo at least. And it's a small footprint, but it's something that ought to be preserved. It could be a lot, it can be a lot of things, but it's not gonna be a moneymaker. That's the problem.
The parallel example to Winehaven, because there are lost opportunities that are sitting there in Richmond and Oakland that are, lost opportunities at the moment. I mean, I think almost it'd be hard to believe that they're gonna pull these off, but let's hope. Funny question. I mean, in a way, I think you can hear us hedging, right? Because we're in it every day. But I think if you ask people in, popular, it's a very popular subject, and people jump all over. People are always, well, you should do this and you should do that.
I'd also like to see that little Casper's hot dog across from McDonald's on Telegraph and about 45th. They started renovating it, and then it didn't happen.
You gotta buy it.
Maybe we'll come back with the Taco Bell. Well, thank you all. I think it was a great conversation. I think we covered a lot of things. I really appreciate you all here. Thank you. So this is the start of the series. The second one is going to happen next month. It's on lighting. Should be another great panel. So please come join us. And I guess tell us what you think of us. Any comments or anything, please scan the QR code and
Did we see
be
any
honest.
chat questions?
We got a couple of them in here. So
Okay.
yep. And that's it.
Thank
you.